Assassin's Creed Black Flag is one of my favorite games of all time. I've replayed this game countless times, and with the Black Flag remake being all but confirmed at this point, I thought I'd go over the features and improvements I'd like to see in the remake. Of course, this is just my opinion, and I'd love to see what you guys think in the comments. With that being said, let's get right into it. The first thing that I'd like to see is to reduce the amount of tailing missions. Now, personally, I didn't mind the tailing missions in the original. However, I do admit that the amount of tailing missions in Black Flag are a lot. I see that. The problem with this is that Edward gets a lot of his information from these missions. For this video, I'm going to try to give solutions for the problems I see. My solution for this is to make more unique missions. For example, in the Assassin's Creed Black Flag novel, instead of Edward tailing some guards and sneaking into the fort at the beginning of the game, Edward and Steed hire some prostitutes, and there's a pretty funny moment where Steed is trying to convince the guards that they are for El Tiburon, and there are a couple of close calls. If they add some more unique missions to take place for the tailing missions, it could work really well. I don't think that they should remove every tailing mission, but they can definitely reduce the sheer amount the original has. The next thing that I'd like to see is something that was originally going to be in Black Flag but was cut, and that is the boss fight with El Tiburon. El Tiburon was the armored brute that was the muscle for the Templars, and we only fought him at the end of the game. When Edward first quote-unquote fights him, El Tiburon one-punches him, but that was not what was originally supposed to happen. It was going to be a boss fight that Edward was supposed to lose, and I'd love to see that in the remake. Edward even references the cut boss fight at the end of the game, which doesn't really make sense, but they could fix that in the remake. A feature that I'd like to see that was very simple, and I can't believe it wasn't in the original, is to customize the weapons you have. Edward in Black Flag can only equip dual cutlasses. This is a huge downgrade from the previous game, AC3. AC3 gave you loads of weapons to equip, so there should be no excuse why Edward can't equip different weapons. Edward can pick up other weapons such as one-handed swords and axes, so why can't he equip them? Even in the Black Flag novel, Edward doesn't use dual swords. He uses a single sword and a flintlock. I get that Edward's dual swords are iconic, but that doesn't stop other assassins from using different types of weapons. Connor's iconic weapon is his tomahawk, but he can use a variety of different weapons. Same with Ezio and his sword, same with countless other assassins. Next up, we have bounty hunters. I am a bit torn on whether or not the Black Flag remake needs a notoriety system, but I'd love to see bounty hunters. In the original, there were pirate hunters, but they were reskins of normal ships, and you could only encounter them on the sea. You could be the most wanted pirate while sailing, and the second you step on land, they just magically stop chasing you. To fix this, I'd love to see on-land bounty hunters that are trying to track Edward down after he becomes too notorious. Now, I don't think Black Flag needs a notoriety system, especially a system as unforgiving as Mirage's or AC3's. You could make the bounty hunters hired by Templars or something like that if you don't want to tie it down to notoriety system. Side content is one of the most important things in open world games. Black Flag originally had very few side quests, and I'd love to see more in the remake. You had Templar hunts, which were alright. I mean, they weren't anything too fancy. I would love to see open world side quests similar to the things we saw in the RPG games. But what I want most is for side quests relating to our ship. The crew in the original game were literal nobodies. The only person who was somewhat developed was Adewale, but even he could be improved. In the Black Flag book, Edward goes out of his way to recruit the best members for his crew. There's a short story where he goes out of his way to find a good cook for his ship, and when he's boarding the cook's ship, he unknowingly cuts the cook's nose off, and he still gets the cook to become a permanent member of his crew. Imagine going below deck, and by the way, we should be able to explore the ship and go below deck, and see the chef or someone like that. Side quests with some of the main characters would be nice too. A Blackbeard, Mary, Vane, or other quest lines would be great. Moving on, the next thing I'd like to see is an epilogue and prologue. Now, I don't want to change the Black Flag story at all. Keep the main story exactly how it was in the original. However, I'd like to see Edward's life before he became a pirate in a side quest or something like that. Maybe throughout the game you unlock bonus memories which you can access by going into your captain's cabin and sitting down and reflecting. Edward's backstory is actually really good and it's already written. Ubisoft does not need to come up with anything original. In fact, the flashbacks we see in Black Flag are very short parts of Edward's backstory. The The memory where Edward gets yelled at by Caroline's father is actually a pretty long sequence in the book, and it ends with him berating Edward, which we see in Black Flag. Edward's backstory consists of him being a farmer, him meeting Caroline, him becoming a privateer, meeting Blackbeard, etc. There are tons of stuff that most fans don't know about him, and this is a perfect opportunity to introduce it to them. Edward actually saw and encountered the Templars multiple times before Black Flag, and he disliked them. So when he saw and he realized that he gave them valuable information when he met them in Black Flag, he instantly regretted it and sort of wanted to help the assassins, which they previously mentioned. There's a story when Edward's first ship gets boarded by Blackbeard. He was forced to fight to the death against one of his crewmates who pretty much kicked his ass, and it was Blackbeard who saved him. After that, Blackbeard took Edward under his wing and trained him. See, there's a bunch of stuff that they could add as side quests or extra memories that players would love to see. I also previously said that I would like an epilogue. Now, if I had to choose, I would rather have flashbacks than an epilogue, but in a perfect world, I'd like both. In the book, after the main story, Edward would go back home and get revenge on the Templars that he encountered when he was younger. Back then, he couldn't do much against them, but after all the experiences he's had, he's more than fit to take them on now. He would also meet his mother, who would disown him because of his actions, and it would even cause Edward to cry. The entire town feared him and treated him with a little bit of respect, which they never did before. It would be cool to see. Edward would meet Duncan Walpole's cousin and is introduced to Reginald Birch, which would ultimately lead to his death. Now, this epilogue isn't needed, but I think it would be a great addition that if you 100% completed the game or did all the side content, you'd unlock. Lastly, I would like to add some housekeeping or small features that could benefit the game. Starting off, add a New Game Plus feature. Black Flag is an amazing game and I love replaying it, but grinding for ship upgrades can be really annoying. Legacy outfits, we need them. A more seamless open world, less loading times between the sea and locations. No RPG leveling system, just please, no. Rowboats, those tiny islands are annoying to swim to. Autopilot, have Adewale or a crewmate take the wheel and let Edward go do something else, like Kenway's fleet or something. Finally, let's talk about DLC. Freedom Cry was the main DLC in the original Black Flag. I wouldn't mind it being remade. There's tons of stuff I'd like to see in a remake for Freedom Cry, but it isn't the end of the world for me if it doesn't get a remake. Instead, if they wanted to focus on an expansion for Edward, I'd be up for it. Obviously, they're going to be limited with what they can do with Edward since he already has sequel stories in the comics and novels, and we already know how he dies. I've seen people say that they should retcon Edward's death, and I disagree. It would pretty much break Assassin's Creed lore, and I don't think anyone would want that. You would throw Hatham's story out the window, AC3 wouldn't make sense, Rogue probably wouldn't happen, Assassin's Creed Unity probably wouldn't make sense either. Syndicate and Chronicles India wouldn't exist, and so on. I think the safe option and the most probable one would be a DLC or expansion for Edward that requires him to come back to the West Indies. You could have Edward team up with his old friends Adewale, Atabai, and Bonnie, etc. The old Assassin's Creed games used to have one large DLC and maybe some small add-ons. Nowadays, Assassin's Creed games can have multiple large DLCs, so if the Black Flag remake follows this pattern, it's likely that it could have up to 3 DLCs. A DLC that I personally would love to see is a Hatham Kenway DLC. Since this is a remake of Black Flag, you're going to have a lot of fans that love the Kenway games and a lot of fans who are just being introduced to these characters. Hatham Kenway is the perfect character for everyone to explore. He's the son of Edward and grandfather of Connor, not to mention how he's connected to a bunch of other people in the franchise. Shay Cormac, Elise, Adewale, etc. Obviously, I'm not a writer, so I'm not going to pretend I can make some groundbreaking story, but I'd love to see a young Hatham Kenway working for Birch and doing Templar tasks. For example, killing assassins, furthering Templar influence, and a bunch of other stuff. Have Hatham remember his father multiple times during the story, connecting it to Black Flag. And maybe we can see Edward's death in a real cutscene rather than in some images. You can have Hatham doing a bunch of stuff and eventually running into Adewale. These two get into a fight and Adewale recognizes Edward's blade. And if you didn't know, Hatham uses Edward's blade for a long time before losing it in a fight with Miko. Have Adewale and Hatham face off multiple times. Maybe Hatham won their first encounter, Adewale won their second, and maybe they stalemate on their third encounter. Have Adewale spare Hatham or something that makes Hatham live in their final encounter. This would explain why Hatham wants to take him down so badly in Rogue. In an ideal world, I'd love to see a Freedom Cry remake, an original Edward DLC, and a Hatham DLC. Other ideas include a Duncan Walpole DLC or some pirate DLC. I feel that if they choose not to do Freedom Cry and they do a Hatham Kenway DLC instead, it would be fine. Assuming Adewale would show up in this, it would give his fans new content to make up for not getting their Freedom Cry remake. However, if they choose not to do a Freedom Cry remake, I definitely feel like the original Freedom Cry should be included when you purchase the Black Flag remake. If I'm being honest, do I think they'll do a story with Hatham? Of course not, but I'm just throwing ideas out there. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. If I missed something that you personally would like to see, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. I make a ton of Assassin's Creed content, so let me know if you guys have any requests. So thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.